He made fun of J.D. Vance, a senator, disregarded the law, and managed his courtroom as if it were his own empire, until he was eventually picked up by justice in the most degrading manner imaginable. The Cincinnati courthouse was crowded, the type of fold that caused individuals to move uncomfortably sitting down. Dark wood paneling lines the walls, bore the burden of history. However, the air felt electric today, as if something were going to break. Judge Robert Calloway stated at the middle of it all, a man with a reputation attached to his name, but not the type that the majority of judges desired. He had a reputation for being theatrical, for interrupting others in the middle of a phrase, for using the courtroom as a stage for his own performance. He was referred to being passionate by some, others careless, but he was very irritable today, looking through papers while letting out a loud sigh, almost ignoring the witness stand, and J.D. Vance came next. The senator sat calmly and straight back. Wearing an immaculately ironed, dark navy suit, he wasn't the type to get rattled easily. He had encountered more hostile mobs, harsher language even. He felt the animosity emanating from the bench. It had begun when he was summoned to testify. Judge Calloway hardly raised his head. "Let's expedite this. Senator, you must have something important to say." Vance adjusted the microphone without flinching. He cleared his throat and started talking, presenting the case's facts in a methodical, controlled voice. But Calloway wasn't paying attention. He crossed his arms and leaned back, with a sneer on his lips as though he was already anticipating an interruption. And when Vance's first important point, "Okay," the judge pounced. "Okay, we understand." With a dismissive wave of his hand, Calloway scoffed. "You have a speech to give. A political rally is not necessary in my courtroom." A few whispers spread among the crowd. Before starting to type again, the court reporter paused. Even a few of the lawyers moved around in their chairs. Vance looked directly into the judge's eyes, unfazed. The appearance of a faint frown, but the jab went unanswered by him. Rather, he went on. But Calloway wasn't finished. He let out a loud sigh, using a disproportionate amount of effort turning a page of his notes before we all perish from boredom. "Let's get this resolved. Shall we?" A few giggles reverberated across the gallery. A few of Calloway's regular defense attorneys, others from those who chuckled uncomfortably. Only a few feet away, Vance's attorney gave up. He leaned in the direction of his colleague, stiffened. "This is not just a biased joke. That is blatant disdain." Beside him, the younger lawyer nodded, but spoke quietly. "He's doing it deliberately." Vance wasn't giving him the response he was hoping for. He just tucked his tie in, maintained a steady tone, and went on. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this evidence is crucial for maintaining the integrity of Don't Give Me the Lecture, Senator," Calloway interrupted, trembling his head. He sighed dramatically, then bent forward. His subsequent remarks were more subdued. "However, it is sufficiently sharp to cut through the entire courtroom. You're not here for justice. Let's face it. You're here to make a statement. That's what you guys excel at." The whispers ceased. "The way," he said. It was subtle yet clear. The intentional disdain that permeates each word. Vance's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. He just let out a steady breath through his nose. He clasped his hands on the table before him. However, his legal team was already in motion across the room. Something was about to change. Judge Calloway was having a good time. He reclined in his seat. He drummed his fingers on the bench. Observing J.D. Vance, grinned in a way that made it obvious. Perhaps he had never respected him. However, the courtroom did not support him today. The whispers that followed his final remark weren't ones that made folks move in their chairs in approval. Some of the exchanges appear awkward, awaiting the outcome of the next event. For his part, Vance didn't fall for the ruse. He wasn't here to debate a man who flourished on conflict. He arranged his papers, cleared his throat, and continued. "When I was saying, Your Honor, the case's facts," Calloway actually let out a groan. "Oh, Senator, give it some rest." He consulted the plaintiff's lawyer. "Do you genuinely want me to endure 5 more? I believed we were dealing with proof during these minutes." A few gasps echoed throughout the room. not ego. The lawyer for the plaintiff, a young lady with keen eyes and a serious demeanor, looked forward before answering, Your Honor. Senator Vance's evidence is crucial to maintaining the case's integrity. If you say Calloway, wave to hand. His eyes narrowed as he turned back to face Vance. But move quickly. I can no longer stand political bullshit. Vance refused to take the insult. He just went on. However, the animosity had evolved beyond words. Calloway moved around in his chair. He rolled his eyes at almost every word when Vance provided important case details. The judge whispered to himself. Once, he scoffed so loudly that the jury might hear it. The room became more tense. Vance's lead lawyer at the defense table, a 50-something man with salt and pepper hair, leaned in the direction of his co-worker. This is unbelievable, and he's not even attempting to conceal it. The younger lawyer gave a nod. Should we wait to submit a motion? He let out a breath, but we're drawing near. Throughout the courtroom, a journalist scrawled frantically on her notebook. She had experienced enough difficulties to recognize when a judge was acting inappropriately, and Calloway was rushing over the boundary, directly into the realm of wrongdoing. But the judge stayed unaffected and flourished in these kinds of situations. His elbows were resting on the bench as he leaned forward. Tell me, Senator, when precisely have you mastered constitutional law? Vance got to know his gaze prior to entering public service. I pursued a legal education. Your Honor, huh? With a sarcastic awareness, Calloway stated. Another politician slipped my mind. Who believes he is an expert just because he has read a few books? Even the bailiff was silent. This man had been employed in this courtroom, didn't move for more than 10 years. Calloway wasn't merely being impolite. In a courtroom, he was disparaging a sitting U.S. senator. In front of a jury on record. Vance let a few seconds go by, and he didn't care. Then he tilts forward a little. His tone was measured and quiet. Your Honor, if we could concentrate on the case, that would be great. Calloway genuinely chuckled. Oh, that's quite wealthy. He turned to face the jurors, as though they knew the joke. You hear that he wants me to concentrate. In actuality, nobody shared his laughter. The silence in the room seemed uncanny. There was a change in the haughtiness that has sustained Calloway across numerous cases, allowing him to rule the courtroom for years, wasn't at work today. However, he was too preoccupied with himself to notice. He turned back to Vance and said, Senator, here's my advice. Stay focused on politics and let individuals handle the law, who are genuinely knowledgeable about their work. A few jurors stiffened as the tension exploded. The court reporter paused before typing again. The legal team for Vance didn't even bother to whisper. This is obviously obvious misbehavior. One of them mumbled, and then all at once. The LED lawyer groped for his phone in silence, due to Judge Calloway's recent transgression, and someone was going to see that he covered the cost. JD. Vance hardly gave a blink. He keeps his hands clasped in front of him. His expression was restrained. However, there was a change in his posture. He wasn't merely putting up with Judge Calloway's actions. He was allowing it to unfold, allowing the haughtiness to grow, exposing it for what it was in the courtroom. He was not required to reply. The judge was working on his behalf. Unaware of the growing tension in the room, Calloway released another sigh of exaggeration. You'll actually sit there and pretend to be the subject matter expert, that your viewpoint is more important than the law. He laughed in private, looking over the case file as though it were a board. Politicians, these days I swear, believe they can enter a courtroom and begin revising the regulations. Vance refused to fall for the ruse. Your Honor, I am here to testify under subpoena regarding what you're here for doesn't matter to me. Calloway's tone was abrupt and patronizing. This is not your stage in the courtroom. Your political fantasies are not something I'm here to indulge. A whisper went around the gallery. This was beyond wrongdoing. Across the room, this was personal. Mark Hendricks was Vance's principal lawyer, clenched his fingers around his pen but remained still. He has dealt with his fair share of challenging judges. However, this was something else. He went to his fellow attorney. Is he ready to lower his voice? The younger lawyer gave a nod. Hendricks nodded slightly when he filed 5 minutes ago. Good. The judge believed he was in charge. However, that was going to change. Meanwhile, Calloway continued to Senator, "This is how I see it. Really, you're wasting not just my time but everyone's." He chuckled a little, and to be honest, if someone were to recite talking points, I would switch on cable news. A few individuals in the gallery moved uneasily. The jury was once focused. Appeared, unsure now, perhaps suspicious of the man in the robe. Calloway, however, was still not listening. He smirked as he leaned forward. "I'll give you an additional 30 seconds. That's it. We're going to something very valuable now." Some of the lawyers at the defense table. Some of them gazed at one another in hardly concealed disbelief. The clerk and the Court A woman who had been employed by Calloway for more than 10 years. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she swallowed hard. Afterward, the heavy. The courtroom's back double doors creaked open. With silent authority, 2 men walked in. They did not work for the court. They were federal marshals, and as soon as they entered the room, the whole energy changed. Calloway initially failed to notice. He was too preoccupied with enjoying his own time. "Okay, Vance, make it count for 30 seconds. Vance saw them, though, so he didn't reply. The marshals proceed down the aisle with intention. Their gazes were fixed on the bench. Hendricks also noticed them. He relaxed his hold on his pen. At last, Calloway became aware of the shift in the environment. His smile faltered. "Why are you whispering?" He looked at the lawyers. "Then someone wanted to share the joke with me at the gallery." Marshall did not say anything. They just moved onward, halting a short distance away from the bench. The taller man is a sharpshooter. No meaningless words. Extracted a folder from inside his jacket. Robert Calloway. Judge, the name struck the air like a wood-striking gavel. Calloway's face twitched in agreement. The marshal advanced one more step. "You must accompany us." Quiet, a profound, uncomfortable quiet, which, like a noose, encircled the entire courtroom. The full. Lawyers at the defense table tensed up. The jury looked around, already cautious, awaiting an explanation of what was going on. The clerk's hands were frozen over the keyboard. After blinking, Calloway gave a brief, disbelieving laugh. "I apologize." But the marshal didn't blink. "Judge Calloway, you are being investigated right now for judicial misconduct, bribery, and obstructing the legal system. We have an arrest warrant for you." The smile disappeared. How quickly Calloway's face lost its color. His lips was slightly open before closing, which was almost hilarious. He blinked once more as though he was waiting for someone to inform him. This was an error of some kind. However, none did, and the gallery was completely quiet, secure for a single pen sound, rolling off a court clerk's desk and falling to the ground for the first time of the day. Calloway appeared uncertain. However, the marshals didn't wait for him to comprehend it. They had already started grabbing the handcuffs. Judge Calloway's self-assurance broke. It didn't completely collapse. Not yet, but there was no denying the change. His fingers tightened against the bench, and his sneer wavered, and for the first time, throughout the day, he appeared to be an unprepared man. "You must be kidding," he sneered. His tone had become sharper as he forced a laugh. He looked around the room unsteady, as though anticipating a substitute to resist against the ridiculousness of what he was listening to, but nobody said or moved. The marshals remained still. "This is the courtroom where Calloway was arrested," pointing a finger at them. "You don't just walk into my courtroom like this." The chief marshal remained unflinching. He merely displayed the warrant. "Judge Calloway, a federal. Probe is currently underway. You must accompany us." The room became more tense. At the defense table, the lawyers were motionless. They exchanged wide-eyed looks. The clerks at the courts were still hovering hands over keyboards, not sure if this should be recorded, or acting as though it hadn't happened, and J.D. Vance came next. He stayed in his current position. His hands were still neatly folded in front of him. His face was unreadable. However, there was something about his serene sitting style, calm as though he had anticipated this. Calloway's respiration became more rapid. He gripped his chair's armrest tightly. He shook his head. No. No. His voice seemed unhinged now. But I don't think so. Like a man frantically attempting to regain authority, I have no idea what sort of stunt this is. However, I am currently undergoing a trial, and you are not in session anymore. The marshal cut in, his tone harsh yet level. The words, "You are under arrest," lingered in the air, smothering little remained of Calloway's conceit. Reporters had their phones out, and the gallery was quiet. Some are taping while others are typing frantically. Calloway's eyes flitted about. His mind was racing, trying to find a way out. His gaze fell upon the bailiff. Leave these men alone. The bailiff did not make much progress. Calloway's shocked expression gave way to a twisted one of rage. Even though it was an order, nothing. The bailiff was almost hesitant to look him in the eye, as everyone was aware that they had always known that Calloway was not an impartial arbiter, that his decisions are too easily in support of specific parties, that cases might be tipped by his rage prior to the disputes even beginning. But suddenly there were more than just rumors. Now that it was official, Calloway leaped out of his seat. He clattered his gavel against the desk. I refuse to be humiliated in this manner. Do you know who I am? The lead marshal's face remained unchanged. He took a step forward, his hand resting, close to his handcuffs. Judge, I really urge you to comply. Calloway laughed bitterly. Oh, he shook his head. You say that's adorable, yet his tone was sarcastic. However, it was now frantic and forceful. And the marshal didn't hesitate. If I didn't, then we forcibly remove you. Another deep quiet. Calloway gave a strong nasal exhale. At his sides, his hands clenched into fists. The haughtiness in his demeanor persisted, but beneath the bluster everything was crumbling. Another thing was beginning to panic. Once more, he glanced out at the gallery, at the reporters during the juries. Progress remained standing and still observing, and abruptly, for the first time in his professional life, Calloway had no authority. Then it dawned on him like a blow to the face. Judge Calloway was exhaling in quick spurts. His face was now red, which stood in sharp contrast to the cold silence had descended upon the courtroom. He said, "You're making a mistake." Lowered but equally caustic voice. The lead marshal made a grave error by failing to reply. He just held out his hand. "Turn around with your palm up." Calloway laughed without humor. "You believe that I will just comply, that I will allow you to parade me out of this place like some felon in handcuffs," the marshal declared. "You are a criminal. Now turn around." His voice is forceful. Calloway's mouth tightened. His gaze quickly returned to the bailiff. Then to the lawyers, court clerks, the jury, anybody. He sought out a lifeline. However, nobody moved or said, as he was alone himself, this time. "You don't comprehend Calloway's attempt once more. This is political, so speak up. An excellent work. My connections are sufficient," the marshal stated, advancing a step. Calloway automatically takes a step back. Colliding with his chair, he held onto the desk before him, like he was holding on to what little power he still had. "No," he mumbled. "No," he shook his head. "I'm not going to do this." The second marshal, who had not spoken thus far, Judge finally spoke. "You can leave here with honor. Else we could pull you out of your decision." Calloway's hands quivered when they touched the desk. Too rapidly, his chest rose and sank. He was a man with years of influencing other people's destiny, using the gavel's swing, and he was now just another defendant. One more man who had to take responsibility for his actions. J.D. Vance continued to observe in silence. Since the marshals arrived, he had remained silent. He didn't have to. The gravity of the situation was sufficient. A stressful moment extended between the marshals and Calloway. Then he did not move quickly. Not combative, but sufficient. He made his back straight, quickly exhaled through his nose before turning. At his sides, his hands were clenched into fists. Whitened knuckles as he made himself stay calm. Behind him, Marshall took a stride, removing his belt's cuffs. It was loud to hear the metal clicking open. Calloway clenched his eyes tight in the silent room. Next click around his wrists. The cuff snapped shut. There was silence in the room. Even those who had anticipated it were overcome with incredulity. The lawyers and reporters. The clerks were motionless, like though they're waiting for someone to inform them. All of this was a complex. Calloway didn't swallow hard. His head remained high and his shoulders stiff. However, maintaining it, there was no longer an act of arrogance. Defiance was the cause. The marshal firmly touched his arm, leading him to LED down the steps from the bench. His footsteps resounded as he went down. As a guy in custody, not as a judge. For a brief, while his gaze shifted to Vance, Vance fixed his unwavering gaze. Calloway initially averted his gaze. The jury in the gallery, the lawyers, as he was led down the aisle. Everyone looked on. Beyond the lines of astonished faces, outside the courtroom he had previously presided over, something fell off his desk as he got closer to the exit. His gavelet made a dull final thump as it clattered against the floor. And handcuffed, Judge Robert Calloway left. His rule was over. The door behind Judge Calloway swung shut, yet the significance of what had just transpired remained in the air without being moved initially. It seemed as though the courtroom itself was silent. Took a time to comprehend. The fall from grace of the guy who had once ordered it. J.D. Vance stayed in his chair. His fingers slowly and delicately tapped the table. He wasn't gloating, measured. He was just taking everything in, not grinning. The principal defense lawyer, Mark Hendricks, gave a quick exhale and reclined in his seat. Well, he said to himself, didn't anticipate that. His co-counsel chuckled softly, remained looking at the door. I did. The lawyer for the plaintiff is on the other side. The same one that Calloway had previously rejected organized her papers. With a slowness that borders on the dramatic, he believed that a new judge would be appointed. A rippling sound of apprehensive laughing swept across the courtroom, initially hesitant, but even that seemed unreal. A judge had just been taken into custody during a trial. The court clerk is still a little stunned, eventually found her way again, and faced the other lawyers. The court will meet again. After a substitute judge has designated her, voice was more steady than she had anticipated. People started moving around in their chairs, muttering to one another. A few lawyers look at each other, clearly unsure of the future course of this case. The jury appeared disoriented and unsure of what to do or even whether they were meant to remain. However, the reporters were already at their jobs, a group of guys close to the rear. They typed frantically on their phones, delivering updates about breaking news. Others spoke into recorders in whispers. Recapitulating what they had just seen, a woman in her early 40s was one of the reporters, with keen eyes and a direct demeanor, told her colleague that this was no longer merely a case. She muttered something. Her companion nodded in Calloway, indicating that this is history. He chuckled briefly and said, "Done." When J.D. arrived, the gallery was still half full. At last, Vance got up and collected his notes, giving his legal team a courteous nod before heading toward the exit when he made his way down the aisle. People moved aside out of instinct. Some gay men nod respectfully and quietly. Others just observed, embracing the man who endured a storm in his seat. He was caught by a reporter without flinching. As he arrived at the corridor, she called Senator Vance. He paused and turned slightly in agreement. She paused at that moment, posed the query that was already moving through the queue. "Did you anticipate this?" Vance took a time to examine her, then gave himself permission to smile just a little. To put it simply, he said, "Justice can catch up by modifying his watch." Then, without saying anything else, he left the courtroom with a stroll. Behind him, in remembrance of Judge Calloway's tenure power, may be euphoric. People may think they are untouchable as a result, that they are able to circumvent the regulations, silence critics, and behave carelessly. However, the reality is that nobody, not even the most powerful people, may avoid responsibility. Indefinitely, Judge Calloway made haughty decisions in his courtroom. Thinking he might manipulate justice to fit his own prejudice, he made fun of suppressed and disparaged people with whom he disagreed. However, the law ultimately doesn't answer to egos. When corruption is revealed and it responds to the truth, it's always tougher to fall than to ascend. If this tale struck a chord with you, remember to subscribe and keep checking back. Since justice is more than just following the law, it concerns those who are prepared to take a stand, despite the odds being against them.